Hello and welcome to Cyberside Chats. My name is Sherri Davidoff.
I'm Matt Durrin.
And today we are going to talk about Anthropic once again, but Anthropic has been all over the news and it's kind of changing the security
This
industry.
feels like Groundhog's Day, seriously.
know.
Like every day.
We're
It's
going to talk about a different aspect of Anthropic, though. We're
Yes.
going to talk about Anthropic's release of source code, specifically the
Yeah.
recent release of Claude Code's source code.
Their accidental release of the source code.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And even though they're big proponents of open source, they have not deliberately released the source code to Claude Code in the past.
So I want to point out to people that the reason that we're talking about this right now is that we actually had a question come in from one of our clients, actually more than
Multiple
one.
clients. And one of them was very well spoken and wrote up some questions. One, what are the security or risk considerations organizations should be mindful of as a result of this source code leak?
Right.
Excellent question.
That is an outstanding question. Yep.
What does this incident meaningfully change how you would assess or monitor the use of Claude or Claude Code in an enterprise environment? We're going to answer that.
We will get to that.
And what are some practical recommendations for educating end users or developers who want to use the Claude platform? And all of this is related, of course, to vibe coding in general, because so many people within organizations are suddenly vibe coding little tools that they can use on a day-to-day basis, changing big software development projects, and also using it for our personal use as well. I say I'm making a little yoga app.
That's
for my
fair.
Personal
Yeah.
use.
Yeah.
So this was not a release of the LLM source code or anything like that.
No, this wasn't like the entire platform. This was the Claude Code, basically the connector system that works to integrate with Claude. So what that means, though, is significant. That means that we have kind of a backdoor into what the integration with the system looks like and how we can potentially misuse that if I'm, a hacker or someone like
And
that.
Claude Code is a doer. It's something that actually executes things. It's something that creates code.
That's the big part.
Malware could potentially be embedded in it. And so this is maybe even more significant, I think, than your general layperson may realize.
Oh, no, I would agree with you.
We're going to go into that.
Yeah, and I think the big part here is not necessarily just the leak. It's what happened after the leak.
Yes,
Like,
which is
right
kind of
after.
amazing. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's get into it. So on March 31st, Claude pushed an update, a new package, and pretty much within minutes, a security researcher discovered that there was a map file in there that had a link.
Yep.
And what did that link go to?
The link went into the source code for the Claude Code API integration system. Which is big.
Yes, exactly. So that happened within minutes. It was boom, announced. And it's funny because 4 hours later, Claude took it down. But by then there had already been tens of thousands of people that had viewed this and distributed it and commented on it and made copies of it. I mean, this was huge.
Yeah, no, I mean, there were literally like thousands and thousands of forks on that repository already.
Right.
There were people who were analyzing the back end substructure of the code. Like, it was out the door.
And then Claude started, or Anthropic started filing DMCA violations to take down all the copies.
Yeah, good luck with that one.
It was like, you can't put this genie back in the bottle at that point.
So one thing we should make clear here is that with the leak of Claude Code, this was not like customer data or any of their proprietary data or credentials or model weights or anything like that were out the door. This was their integration platform, which by itself is still not great, but
So what did we find?
Oh,
we discovered
kinds of stuff.
44 hidden features.
Yep.
Some of them were interesting. One was called Kairos. So that was supporting some advanced autonomous coding related systems. So you can kind of see where Anthropic is going with this. We also found a Tamagotchi pet Easter egg.
We did. That was amazing, by the way. Yeah.
And then what about the undercover mode feature? I thought that was really
the undercover mode feature. I think that was really interesting. That's basically what it's a safeguard that's put in place to keep the model from disclosing things like training data or sensitive information that it might be using.
Yes.
And if you can bypass undercover mode, well,
it also, so this is the finding that was the most discussed, I think, of all of the hidden features.
I think you're right. Yeah.
There's a system prompt within Claude Code that says, and I quote, "You are operating undercover in a public open source repository. Your commit messages, PR titles, and PR bodies must not contain any Anthropic internal information. Do not blow your cover." I mean,
I love that quote so much. Yeah.
something subtle. Don't put in there like,
Yeah.
do not blow your cover.
Yeah.
They're very dramatic,
they,
Anthropic.
I mean, literally, you could see somebody like in a trench coat and a top hat saying that. But yeah, no, that was amazing.
So pretty much immediately, somebody did a clean room rewrite of Claude Code.
Right, right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah,
'Cause I
so
think that is the most impactful thing of all to come out of all of this.
yeah, so for those that are not familiar with that term, a clean room rewrite means that they basically rebuilt the system from what it's supposed to do and not what the actual source code was.
Yes.
And that means it is now available to basically anyone,
Yeah.
and it is just, kind of out there in the public, which
So
is, yeah.
Claw Code within a day.
Oh, claw code, yeah. I
Code
love
is
that they named
adorable.
it that, yeah.
Number one education point is making sure developers understand the difference between Claude Code and Claw Code
Right.
because it can be pretty, a little
Yeah.
tricky. And within a day, they had their own website. They have thousands of followers. One of the big differences here is that Claw Code is not restricted to the Claude models.
Yeah.
It can use OpenAI models. It can use other models. And in that, I think that alone makes it more powerful and versatile in a lot of ways.
Well, it makes it more dangerous too because
Yeah.
by doing that, it bypasses a lot of those safety rails that Claude has in place, which is going to be something that we're going to have to keep an eye on.
Well, yeah, and I'm very pro open source, but
Sure.
at the same time, there are risks associated with the flexibility and versatility and all of that. Because, Claude or Anthropic is a company that may, stand behind its platform, that may put significant resources and time and effort into vetting it, into security and things like that.
Sure.
Whereas when you get to an open source project, it really varies. There's a wide range in terms of how much investment there is. There was that case last year where we discovered, what was it, a backdoor that someone was trying to put into the XZ package.
Oh, yeah,
source
yeah, yeah.
project. Do you remember that?
I do remember that one. Yeah, that was interesting. That was a years-long project too, but yeah.
Yes, and not that that can't happen with closed source code, solar winds. But you
I
have
like
to
that.
make sure that the project is vetting who they allow to be a maintainer, who they allow to commit code, and things like that.
But in this case, because there were so many forks on the project already, and remember, a fork just means
Oh,
other
point.
people now have access to that code
Yeah.
and their own variations of that code. Like, I mean, there's untold variations that you could come up with at this point.
And another thing that happened very soon after the code was leaked was, of course, there were malicious.
Oh, yeah,
So it
because of course there
well.
were. Yep.
So if you went onto GitHub or other platforms, you would see advertisements for the leaked Claude Code source, and some of it had backdoors and malware and other nasty things put into it. So that was pretty much an immediate repercussion.
I mean, we kind of just have to assume that's going to happen whenever there's like a source code leak because it's so predictable at this point, which
Yeah.
is ridiculous. But yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts or points that you wanted to mention before we go into answering our clients' questions?
Yeah, so there's a couple things we want to talk about. I mean, I think the big point that we want to bring home here is that, I mean, Claude AI's source code was not leaked.
Correct.
So that's not what we're trying to say here, but a critical connector into the application was, and that can lead to a couple of things. Because remember, this is like the agentic layer behind Claude. This is the thing that can do things on your network. So if someone gets access to it,
Well, and it's creating code.
yeah, exactly.
So that code is going to get distributed potentially to thousands, if not tens of thousands of systems or more. So if something gains access to it, it could potentially push out malware or malicious backdoors as well.
Yeah, no, it can do all kinds of things. Like if it can get access to your network, it can execute code. That's the big the big problem here.
Yeah. And I don't believe in security through obscurity, but there's no question that having source code can help you find vulnerabilities. So that's just step
100%.
Assume right now that
Ironically, Claude is really good at
I
finding
know.
those vulnerabilities in source code. Yeah.
Oh, that's another thing we
Yeah.
forgot to mention. This is the second leak that Anthropic experienced just in what, like 4 or 5 days?
It hasn't been that long.
Yeah. So about 4 days before that, they had a leak of, I think it was about 3,000 files? Yeah, 3,000 internal files. And that was when we first heard about Mythos, the new model that they're not going to release. So this, for Anthropic, this is another PR disaster because they're supposed to be very pro security, very careful. about how they manage their code. All right, so let's get back to answering our questions. Number one, what are those security and risk considerations that organizations should be mindful of because of this leak?
Right. I mean, so that comes down to basically the abilities that Claude has inside of a system, like Claude Code or something like that. So that's your execution paths. It is your permissions. It's the layer that it operates inside
Right.
your network. If it has access, then someone who gets access to it will also have that same access. I know that sounds
Right. And
basic, but like
at
it's
this
true.
point, because the source code has been leaked, it's easier for adversaries to do things like prompt injection or find flaws or things like that. So just
Sure.
keep in mind there's a little bit of heightened risk. Also, now that there are other tools, open source tools available that do basically the same thing,
Yeah.
um, but with some different security models, it's really important to be aware of the fact that those could be used to create software as well, either
Right.
in your environment or the environment of someone you depend on. So think about like vendor vetting, for example.
That's
Do
huge. Yeah.
do you use vibe coding tools? If so, are they open source? Are they closed source? How are you vetting them? Things like that.
Well, and it also means that if an attacker can get access to your system, they can determine a couple of things pretty quickly based on the fact that this code is out there. They can know how that system actually behaves, and that takes them from initial exploitation out to execution way faster than they would otherwise be able to be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
potentially. So second question is, does this incident meaningfully change how you would assess or monitor the use of Claude and Claude Code in an enterprise environment? Yes and no.
We had this conversation earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, yes
Yeah.
and no. So, one, I mean, you can always increase your monitoring. I think the big thing, though, is that this creates awareness of security and vibe coding tools.
Yeah.
So, really, I would treat this as an opportunity. Hey, security of vibe coding tools is in the news. Let's talk about how we're going to govern them, how we're going to vet them, how we're going to log and monitor their use.
Yeah. No,
So,
like strike while the iron's hot. Like we're right there.
exactly. Let's take advantage of this.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then finally, what are some practical recommendations for educating end users or developers who use the Claude platform? And again, there's the Claude platform and then there's Claude Code. So
Yeah.
let's focus on Claude Code since that's the leak here.
Mhm.
If you have anyone, and honestly, a lot of people who aren't officially developers are using Claude Code. That's the point.
That's the big point. Yeah.
Yes. And you need to educate them about understanding where their vibe coding tools come from. Because again, Claw Code is going to be more flexible. You can use different
Yeah.
models. There's a lot of benefits. What is the security model? This is a very new tool. How is it going to evolve over time? If I was a nation state actor, I would be targeting Claw Code.
Oh, I know I'd be going.
I mean, I'd be targeting all the vibe coding tools, but particularly open source ones where maybe I could sneak in some backdoors for a little while without people noticing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a good chance we're probably going to see, especially with the number of forks and variations of this we've seen. Like, there's going to be someone who
So many.
compromises at least one of them.
Yeah,
So,
one of the variations. So understand what vibe coding tools your folks are using.
Yeah.
You might even want to have them register centrally, like, hey, I'm vibe coding. And like, we support that maybe in your environment, but what are you using? And here's some education about how to vet the tools that you're
well,
using.
and one of the things that I've noticed, and you and I have both been vibe coding lately. Like that's a thing.
Yes.
But,
I have a lot to do.
yeah, but what I've noticed about that is, I mean, the coding itself, especially with applications like this, I mean, it doesn't get you 100% of the way.
No.
So understanding what that code's actually doing and treating it the same way that you would integrate into your same software development lifecycle or your secure development lifecycle, like that becomes really important. We can't just trust that the AI is going to do stuff the right way because, let's be honest, it probably won't in a lot of cases. We've seen that, but yeah, understanding how that's actually working and knowing what the actual risk is in your environment becomes incredibly important at this part because it's really easy to make these applications. They might not be secure.
Absolutely. Well said. When it comes to vibe coding, trust but verify.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there we go.
All right, let's go into our key takeaways for everybody. Number one, treat AI coding agents like they are controlled execution environments. You are changing things in your environment. This is different from an LLM like Claude.ai, where you're asking it for advice and things like that.
Right.
It is actually creating things that are going to be running in your environment
Yeah.
and in other production environments.
It gets execution rights inside of your network, and
Yes.
that can be dangerous.
Yeah, so check permissions, understand how it's being integrated, all that good
Yeah.
stuff.
The next thing is that, especially with code leaks like this, we have to assume that every attacker on the planet is probably eyeballing this right now and
Absolutely.
looking for ways that they can get
Yes.
their way in. So just assume attackers are studying the architecture and trying to find ways that they can exploit that for their own benefit.
Yeah, how can they
Yeah,
worm your way into your environment using tools
yeah,
like this or
exactly.
escalate privileges, things like that?
Yeah.
Prioritize the immediate risks. As we talked about, there are now copycat malicious repositories and lots of forks of these vibe coding tools that are targets for adversaries. So make sure everyone is aware that these malicious repositories exist and that everyone's careful about what tools they're downloading and running, especially
Yeah.
when you're running them in a privileged way within your environment.
No, that's huge. And to piggyback off that, our next takeaway, I just ensure that developers, especially ones that you may not work with directly, like this comes down to third parties in a lot of cases, but make sure that they're aware of what's official and what is not.
Yeah.
Because there are tons of unofficial tools out there, and any one of those could potentially lead to something like, a backdoor into your environment. I mean, we've seen this happen before. So again, just be careful about that.
Yep. And last takeaway, every crisis is an opportunity. That's actually the subtitle of my data breaches book. Leverage this. Take this as an opportunity to think about how vibe coding tools are used in your environment, how they're vetted, and formalize governments for AI development tools. So, with that, great conversation, Matt. Thanks
Yeah,
so
that was
much.
fun.
Thank you all for tuning in. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week on Cyberside Chats.